Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Barr. I'm the Associate Director of Career Development for the Schar School of Policy and Government. And today, what we're going to be talking about is interviewing skills. So we're going to talk about kind of what the overall interview process looks like and just talk about some of the tips and tricks that you can use to maximize your experience and really just kind of make sure you present yourself the best of your abilities. So first thing we're going to talk about is kind of like what's the setup with this? So first things first. Interviews are ultimately a two-way street. So they are, yes, indeed, evaluating you for this kind of opportunity, but this is also your chance to evaluate them, whether it's an ideological, whether it's a skill fit, or even whether it's a just kind of overall mission goal fit. It is very important for you to review what the job is really offering, as well as kind of like what the overall goals of this organization are. Is there kind of a personality fit? Is there kind of a good kind of melding of opportunity here for you and the employer? So employers do want to know, obviously, a little bit about you when they're going through this process. So they first want to know, are you going to be able to do the job well? They're also going to want to know what interests you about the opportunity. You know, for those individuals who kind of go to these things thinking, hey, this is a really good inflated salary, this is exactly what I need. That isn't necessarily going to be a good pitch for the organization. For the most part, are the interests this person has in this opportunity valid, and do they kind of align with what we are as an organization kind of promoting? How good of a fit will you be for that team? Is there kind of like that institutional fit? Yes, but also kind of like in this smaller division of individuals, are you really kind of melding with those individuals as well? Are you really kind of able to work effectively? Is there a personality fit? Just overall, how well do you work with the other individuals that would be on this team? Then they're also going to want to know what traits, qualities, and skills you bring to the table that will help you achieve the mission goals, what will help you get the job done. If there is a technical qualification, things like SPSS, Stata, Tableau, Python, any of those different kind of technical platforms, Salesforce, CRM systems could also be other examples. How well do you know those things, and have you used them in professional environments in the past? Or if it's something like data analysis, have you used them in pseudo-professional environments? Things like conducting research analyses, if you've been a part of a research assistantship, and you've used those platforms, or you've taken courses that are giving you speciality or any kind of degree of proficiency in those systems, that's more or less what they're looking at. And then this is a competitive process. They are going to be evaluating you, yes, in terms of how well you can do the job, but they're also going to be evaluating others and comparing and contrasting you versus the others. So it is important to understand that in any competitive process, the best thing you do is put your best foot forward, try to present as much information that validates why you are a good, relevant candidate, and then keep moving forward from there. So that's kind of where the interview goals come in. You want to make a positive impression, and this goes beyond just the first impression. It is unfortunately possible to fall on your face in the third round of interviews. So it is important to make sure that as you're going through this process, you are still presenting this, persona, this overall, who you are, obviously, but this individual that, is a very relevant and very good addition to whatever this organization is looking for, to their team. You also want to learn more about the organization from its employees. And so there will be some degree of canned responses they will give. If you ask them, like, what do you like about your organization? They're not going to say, give you kind of a list of pros and cons. They will exclusively focus on the pros. But for the most part, this is your opportunity to learn a little bit about what their motivations for joining this organization are, as well as kind of like what their motivations for staying in this kind of position. It also gives you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what is the professional development with this organization. How do they keep their employees happy? What are some of the expectations around this person they are hiring? And so there's a good opportunity for you to ask this. This is typically a part of every interview, the opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of it. But just know that this is a good opportunity for you to learn, not necessarily just about kind of like what the position entails, but just specifically why you should want the position. And then relate your abilities and experiences to the position. This is really kind of the bread and butter of every interview process. They're trying to evaluate, yes, do you have the qualifications, which they can, generally speaking, identify through your resume and cover letter. But this is your opportunity to really kind of relay and elaborate on those experiences, share your experiences, your behaviors, the different kind of opportunities and responsibilities you had in the past. This is how you really convey to them that you are a good institutional fit. But one, you are a good institutional fit, but this also provides you an opportunity to showcase why you have the ability to do the job responsibly because you've done it before. So that's really kind of what you're hoping to kind of outline here. And if you haven't done the direct exact same thing, what transferable experiences do you have that you can kind of say put into that context? So for example, if they're asking you to describe your troubleshooting process, like how do you resolve an issue if you hit a road bump? One of the things you'll want to do is if you have not done that specific job duty before, transfer a little bit of the experience. Everybody has typically had at least one opportunity to troubleshoot something, deal with some degree of chaos, or just kind of resolve a problem. So talk about your process. Talk about how you have gone through that and describe what you have done to resolve those issues, how you've overcome a challenge. And so more or less, that kind of question is not asking how have you done this exact job duty before. It's asking about what your process is. And that's another important thing to be able to outline in your interviews. So in terms of preparing for the interviews, you do want to make sure you do a copious amount of research beforehand. So you can identify information through the company website, typically the About Us, the press releases, and the upcoming events will give you at least an idea of kind of like what the scope of their mission is, as well as what past projects they have done before. Traditionally, most organizations aren't constantly doing new independent projects or new, identifying new ways to spend their grant money. Traditionally, what they will do is they will identify kind of like a project-based model that will have some kind of rotation, throughout the course of a fiscal year. And so through that process, you can identify, okay, so what are some of the main projects that I would be expected to participate in? What are some of the main ways that I would be working for this organization? That will identify a little bit more for you to be able to kind of say, what experiences do you want to relay that showcase you could do those same projects? Better Business Bureau is another way. This gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of like what does their company say, or what are people saying about their company. You can also look at Yelp, Google reviews, Glassdoor, a number of different or Wikipedia, but another different resource, a bunch of different resources to help showcase, again, would you be happy at this organization? And are you an institutional fit? It also helps outline a little bit more about kind of what, the pay might be, as well as just kind of like, are people happy there? So, I mean, and one concern you want to, that you might have is, if the people you've worked for before have been micromanagers and you find out in Glassdoor people are saying, wow, there are really a lot of micromanagement issues at this organization, then that might not necessarily be the best opportunity for you. And so this will help you evaluate whether or not this is a position that worthwhile applying to, one, but also if you're going through the interview process, if this is something that you should definitely want to accept. Based on your research, identify 5 of the most relevant skills towards that position. And so what I typically will like to do is go through the job description, identify and categorize the different responsibilities they have, and then I create those specific themes. And so based on those specific themes, I'll construct a little bit about what I want to share from my experiences that outline how I have worked in those same capacities. A lot of organizations will generate different questions based on kind of the specific skills you would use in those organizational positions. And so one of the things you want to make sure you're doing through this process is identifying how you have done those skills before, using kind of citing specific examples of how you've used them. Because it's one thing to kind of allege how you would handle something, provide a hypothetical response. But the way to make sure that that is a certainty, that that is how you would handle that, is to share how you have handled that skill in the past. So what I like to do in a lot of my answers is provide the kind of hypothetical, allege this is how I typically would like to handle things. And here's an example that backs that hypothetical response up. Project what questions they might ask you. Like I said, you'll design that specific theme of those specific themes regarding what they might ask you about, or specifically the skills they are most interested in regarding your candidacy. And so that will help you kind of, project what kind of skills you need to relay. And then you also want to make sure you're creating good questions that you're going to ask the interviewer. Like I said before, this is your opportunity to evaluate whether or not this would be a good opportunity for you. If you need a specific style of leadership or management to help you kind of flourish in these organizations to become the best employee you can be, then you want to make sure you ask a question about what is their management style? How do you ensure that you are supporting your employees? If you are a person who is constantly looking at kind of like developing yourself, ask, what kind of professional development opportunities do you have within your organization? Is there an opportunity for me to go for another degree? Is there a certification process I'd be able to go through? Or you could even ask, like, have any of you in this panel participated in professional development with this organization? This will tell you a little bit more about, how much equity are they putting into their employees and improving their, not necessarily just the employees' lives, but how are they making sure that the individuals who are working for these organizations are kind of like adding more value to their positions as well as their organization. And then establish your commute. This is really just kind of figuring out, okay, if it is an in-person interview, how do I make sure that I'm getting there early enough without being kind of a sweaty, sloppy mess to be able to kind of like be in my best form for this interview. The reason technological is on the screen right now is because this also is, if it's a virtual interview, you want to make sure that you establish, are you going to be doing this at home? Is there like a school bus that is going to be coming through? That there's going to be a huge amount of, diesel sounds in the background. Do you have pets that, typically this is their walk time? Just think about some of those X factors that, you would not necessarily think on the first stage. Just consider kind of like what the environment is telling you, as well as if your internet connection is going to be stable enough to provide that. If you've done these kind of conversations, virtual conversations before, and you find that, hey, my internet dips at this specific time because the leaves on the trees grow, and I'm using satellite internet for some reason, then, that's going to be one of the things to kind of keep in mind. That also could mean that if you're doing this over the phone and, you get a little bit of better signal in, say, the bedroom or the office or in the basement for whatever reason, then you're making sure that that is where you're going to be doing your interview. Where do you get the best signal? And then plan your outfit. Make sure that you have kind of like, your main outfit and then a backup outfit just in case, like, your breakfast burrito spills out or some other kind of, random thing happens, coffee gets spilled on the shirt. That kind of stuff happens. And so it's better to make sure that you have kind of like your primary outfit and then a backup just in case, something does happen to the primary. That way you're not having to scramble for something and try to put that together and ends up looking a bit haphazard. So just make sure you plan your outfit to make sure that, it doesn't become a stressor on the day of the interview, because interviews are generally stressful experiences. During the day of the interview, some things you want to make sure you bring with you: copies of your resume, cover letter, reference lists, other documents they may have requested. If you have like a dissertation or you have like a collegiate thesis, don't worry about printing out 5 copies of that. Just kind of make sure you have 1 copy that you can kind of give them if that is something that you added to the overall job application. Don't provide additional materials that were not requested. That should be absolutely certain here. Other supporting materials could be things like if there was a writing sample, if they asked for a portfolio. These are different documents that would be helpful to have kind of physical copies of, especially if you're doing this in person. If this is a virtual interview, just make sure you have them somewhere accessible so you can send them off to them very quickly following the interview or even during the interview, just to make sure that you can kind of get that off super quick. Don't smoke and do bring breath mints. This is not necessarily a Surgeon General warning kind of thing of don't smoke. This is just, the main challenge people will have in interviews is distractions of both you and the interviewer. And so you want to make sure that the individual interviewing you isn't necessarily going to be distracted by your breath, as well as any other kind of like contingent factors. So if the background of your interview space is got like a whole bunch of Slayer posters or a whole bunch of like death metal things, like, not saying that that's bad stuff to listen to. The main thing you want to make sure is that they're not going to be focused on what the posters are saying behind you. In fact, you want them to be focused on what you're saying and kind of like the answers you're relaying. And so the reason I suggest bringing breath mints over, say, like gum, is that you have to get rid of gum. And I don't recommend swallowing it. So for the most part, bring breath mints, that stuff dissolves and you'll be fine. Give yourself plenty of time to get there or set up your interviewing space. If you know that the interview time is typically feeding time for your pets, then generally speaking, it would be best to make sure that you feed them early, so that, you can close the door and make sure that they aren't going to come in and bother you or distract the interview. If you are, commuting, say, an hour on the metro, what I typically like to do is double the time. And so if the interview space is an hour away from my house, then I'm going to make sure that I double the amount of time. So I will take 2 hours to get to that interview space. And yes, that might mean I end up getting there an hour early, but this gives me enough time to cool down. It gives me enough time to drink my water, to really kind of go over my notes, kind of like cool out a little bit. And you can find any one of the thousands of coffee shops in the DC area that will have, if it's during the summer, the sweltering heat might be nice to be in, say, in an AC environment. So just keep in mind that the commute is more than just specifically going from point A to point B. It's making sure you get to point B without, completely upsetting or uprooting the day. Double check how you're looking. For the most part, you can always feel free to use the bathroom to kind of like check the mirror, just make sure that your outfit's looking good. If you are like me, and especially in the DC heat during the summer and the humidity, you you want to make sure that you are plenty cool by the time you end up getting into the interview space. You don't necessarily want to be looking like all sweaty and gross. And so just keep that in mind. And then make sure that your hair is looking okay and that, there's no, residual breakfast burrito on your cheek or anything like that. Then, before the interview, take that breath and then rock it. Okay, so before receiving the call or a virtual interview, make sure you've done your research on who you'll be speaking with. So these are some of the other things to kind of keep in mind, prior to meeting with these individuals. For the most part, a lot of individuals are on LinkedIn. If it is a TSSCI level clearance position, there might not be, but for the most part, the person the person processing your interview process, what they will do is they will likely send you an email saying you are going to be speaking with this individual for this amount of time on this day. If they don't, you can always ask follow-up questions. You can ask things like, who exactly will I be speaking with? And make it a short email. Generally speaking, the people who are scheduling these interviews might be inundated with a lot of communications. And so you want to make sure that you're not providing them a list of tasks to accomplish, because they will probably just backlog that until they handle all their other work. So making it a simple one sentence question is going to be to your best advantage. And so, ask them the question of, do you know who I will be speaking with and for what amount of time? And then you will hopefully get a response saying, oh, it's this person or it's me, and it's going to be for 25, 30 minutes. LinkedIn also will help showcase kind of like what similarities you might have in your background. So if you do that, you find out they are also an Eagle Scout, or they did AmeriCorps or Peace Corps or something to that effect, then that's something you can kind of casually bring up during the interview process, like the tell me about yourself section, which typically every interview will start with something similar to that, like tell us a little bit about yourself, why this industry, why this organization, why this position. So all those are meant to elicit kind of like, why are you a relevant candidate? And so what you can do there is say, well, I've been involved in AmeriCorps right after grad school, and I saw, online that, John Smith over there had also been a part of AmeriCorps. And so, but, that really kind of helped constitute a little bit more about why I wanted to do it, and kind of like help pull that together. And then you have kind of a shared connection to the person interviewing you. And that's a good way to kind of like develop that relationship. Be sure to have the contact information of the interviewer. This is also for if you are commuting to a specific place. If you get to the place a little bit early and they're not ready for you yet, or if if there's something going on with the metro, which invariably there might be. Then what you'll want to do is make sure that you have the contact information of that person to be able to kind of call them and say, hey, I'm very sorry that this happened, but there's been an issue on the metro. I'm currently stuck on the red line on X stop. And so I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get there. But I just want to let you know that I'm still very excited about this interview, and I'm really kind of looking forward to speaking with you. I just wanted to give you an update about kind of like where I'm at. That kind of information, or if the call gets dropped, that kind of information will help save the interview. Because, for the most part, they could also say, oh my gosh, so sorry. Well, we have an opportunity a little bit later in the day to interview. Would you like to reschedule? And then if that's the case, that's totally fine. It's unlikely that they would say make a decision about a position in between the time you would have interviewed and the time that you are rescheduling to interview. However, if they say, well, we can try to reschedule this for next week sometime. That's a little bit too much time. And so I would just say, I'm going to do my best to get there on time. But, just understand, this is out of my control. I can't control this. And then hopefully that will kind of negotiate the continuance of the interview. You're going to have a little bit of an idea of what's going to be asked of you based on the kind of themes you put together, as well as some of the different questions you projected. But I mean, just put that in your notes of different things you want to address in the interview, things you want to share, things or experiences that you think will be helpful to them in their evaluation of your candidacy. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. A lot of this process can be very confusing, and some of these interviews might be 3 or 4 stages long. And so it is not uncommon for these individuals who are processing this experience to be able to receive questions. And so feel free to ask questions. My only advice is don't ask questions that are obvious. If it's a virtual interview, don't ask, are we going to be using Zoom or are we going to be using Teams? Because they will send you the link that will tell you that information. So don't ask the obvious questions, things that will be, might seem obvious, but are good to clarify. Things like, how long is the interview? Or specifically, what kind of, is this a kind of a screening call? Is this, what kind of format should I prepare for? If this is over Zoom, will I need to have my camera on? Those different kind of questions might seem a little bit obvious, but that clarification can also help prevent you from arriving at a situation. Although I advise always dressing professionally, even if it's a phone interview, it can help facilitate making sure that you are in your best form for this interview. Some additional tips: practice good posture. I like to lean forward in interviews. For one, this provides a this provides a better sense of engagement in the conversation. It also helps you kind of, show yourself as a little bit more energetic for the interview process. And so practicing good posture, one of the things in terms of leaning forward is that you can sit at the edge of your seats. Don't use the back. You don't necessarily want to appear too laid back in an interview process. And so this will help you kind of overall engage in the conversation. You also want to maintain eye contact. And so this will also help showcase your engagement with the individual speaking with you, but also help convey the energy that you're putting into this experience. If this is being done over virtual, make sure that you're looking at the lens of the camera versus what you're looking like, what the other people are looking like. This will help, again, engage you with the conversation. Smile and be polite. That seems, again, fairly obvious, but for the most part, don't force a smile. You can still be energetic and emphatic about these kind of experiences and sharing your opportunities and responsibilities from the past without basically forcing yourself to be like super happy all the time. And so the most parts, especially if you're talking about some severe topics or anything like that, like national security or working in advocacy in a number of different areas, you don't necessarily want to be smiling during the whole time, as there might be some kind of topic areas that do not facilitate a smile kind of mentality. Feel free to speak with your hands, but don't overdo it. I am an individual who speaks with my hands quite frequently, but you just want to make sure that you're not like, throwing hands all up in their face. So just make sure that, as you're using it, or as you're using your hands to speak, you kind of like bring them back to center. What I like to do is make sure I'm folding my hand, just to make sure that, as I'm going through this process, it's, not distracting them, but it also makes sure that I'm not getting a little bit too wild with my gestures. And then don't overshare. Some questions that you might be asked are like, can you tell us about a time where you had a confrontation with a stakeholder, a customer, a patron? I would not share a story in which it got to a knockdown, drag out fight. If it is a scenario where, you work in healthcare, obviously you're not wanting to share anything protected by HIPAA. If it is a national security position and you break confidentiality in your interview, that is going to be grounds for obviously you're not going to get this position. So don't overshare. Generally speaking, you want to avoid getting too political and avoiding a lot of buzz topics. For the most part, a lot of times you will never know who you're actually speaking with until you're speaking with them. And so whether they supported one party over the other, it's a gamble if you start going on saying, "Oh, yes, was an avid supporter of this candidate." That's going to potentially ruin the interview. So don't be too political, avoid buzz topics. And then, again, just avoid oversharing. Personal details and all that kind of stuff are personal details, not necessarily fit at this stage for a professional environment. So the typical interview process will take this kind of form. So you're going to greet the interviewer politely, or it's basically going to be hey, thank you so much for interviewing me today. It's a pleasure. Commuting here was absolutely easy. It's super fine. And then essentially be at ease, remain focused, take a little bit of, stock of kind of how you're feeling. It is natural for anybody in this process, any interview process, to feel a bit nervous. These aren't like non-stressful experiences. So for the most part, understand that your anxiety is natural. It is expected at this point. So traditionally there'll be about 2 to 3 minutes of small talk, just kind of like, oh, how's your commute? Oh, did you find the place okay? Did you need validation? That kind of stuff. This will make sure that you are keeping yourself from this will be a natural part of any kind of specific interview process. They might also kind of outline what the position is, kind of what the interview process is. They might talk a little bit about what their overall timeline is during this small talk. So it's good to be engaged well during this part of the process. And then the interview begins. And so they will ask their questions. You want to be open and honest. Never don't make things up, especially if they are super verifiably false. So always be open and honest during an interview. Don't get too personal. Do keep it kind of as professional as possible. And then also keep from droning on. This is one of the things I kind of commit a little bit to in interviews. So do keep in mind, you want to keep things relatively succinct, but you also want to make sure that in any kind of storytelling environment, much like interviews are, that you're providing a good beginning, middle, and end. And so keep yourself from droning on too much and you'll be fine. And then at the end of it, you'll be able to ask your own questions. Traditionally, there'll be enough time for 2 to 3 questions. So, what I will do is I kind of overplan for this process because I won't necessarily know what the context of every person in that interview, like what their positions are. So what I'll do is I'll kind of create questions for, is this a supervisor? Is this a lateral position? Is this like a CEO or director or admin level? And then I'll ask them kind of specific questions regarding those specific populations. I don't necessarily want to ask a lateral person what their management style is, much like I wouldn't necessarily want to ask the CEO of an organization, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Those things won't necessarily vibe. So it's important to make sure that you're crafting questions specific to the populations you're interviewing with. And then there's going to be closing remarks and they'll discuss next steps. If they don't discuss next steps, one of the things you can do is either, if you remember in the moment, what are the next steps from here? Or if that gets completely left out of the interview, then you can always feel free to email the individual that interviewed you and just ask them, hey, I wanted I forgot to ask what next steps were. Would you be able to talk to me about that? Okay, so here are going to be some tough interview questions, and I'll give some of the different rationale for why they are a little bit tough. Tell me about yourself is going to be a part of any specific interview process. And like I said before, this is going to take a number of different forms. They might ask you about yourself. They might ask you to provide a little bit of your background. They might ask you to walk through your resume. They might ask you why this position, why this organization, why this field. All of this is to identify why you are a relevant candidate. So during that part of the process, some of the challenge people will have with this kind of question is they'll provide way too much context. You don't necessarily want to go all the way back into your background. Like when I was a wee child of 5 in elementary school, X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth. That is providing way too much context. So what I suggest is considering that you've already designed what your themes are, just considering you've already discussed what your, you've figured out, projected kind of what they're going to ask you. What I would do is I would try to showcase relevance, my relevant background to what those themes are, to what the different projected questions are. And so if it's a position for a data analyst, I would talk about, it's like, well, data analysis in all of its forms, it really kind of defines my career. I started at this company doing this specific thing within analysis, gained technical qualifications doing this specific thing. Or if it's the tell me about yourself question, it's like, well, I didn't initially get involved in the career of data analysis until I was in grad school. Started getting a little bit more experience with Stata and Tableau. And so I found that I was really good at it. And so I, started gaining experience in analysis and, so on and so forth. So give them the rationale for why you are a good, relevant candidate. And then this will help provide them kind of context for what your motivation to take this position would be. Greatest strengths and weaknesses. Strengths aren't necessarily, that isn't the difficult part of this question. Unless the strength you provide them is, I'm too good of an employee. Things that are, generally speaking, a bit hokey. So my general suggestion is, in the case of strength, relate them to the position. So if it's, an analyst position, talk to them about how you have a very good keen eye for detail, how you are very good at interpreting data. Or you're very good at conveying complex data to individuals who have no familiarity with it. Those different kind of things. So you're a good explainer, if you will. In the case of weaknesses, focus on areas of improvements instead. This is one of my favorite reframing techniques. And so during the interview process that they ask you, talk to us about your greatest weakness. I would say, well, I don't really like to consider things weaknesses because for the most part, weaknesses is not, you're not working on it. You're just not good at it. So rather, I focus on these things as areas of improvement. And so one of my areas of improvement is communication. Not that I feel I'm a bad communicator. It's just one of the challenges we will have in communication in general is that it's constantly evolving. The different methods we use, the different kind of platforms that are available, like using things like AI technology to improve our writing and all that kind of stuff. How are we making sure that we're not just leaving the keys in the car and letting AI take it? How are we making sure that we are, say, working in concert with this resource? So constantly, I'm looking at the different ways this process is improving and the ways in which I can utilize it to the best of my ability. So communication, I think I'm a very good communicator, but it's also one of those areas that is just constantly improving. And so that's kind of what I would provide as a response to a weakness. And so regardless of what example you use, talked about how you have improved it, how you have made it less of a weakness. What do you want? Why do you want to work for us, or why do you want this position? Focus on the mission, the purpose of the organization, how that inspired you to apply. It could be the population you'd be working with. It could be the specific region that it's focused on. A number of those different things. Provide a good, semi-wholesome, well, not semi-wholesome, a good wholesome kind of rationale for why you want this position. If it's like, oh, this provides a good upward mobility for me, this allows me to kind of advance in my career, well, not necessarily a bad thing to mention. It is supplemental to what your actual motivations for this position are. It should be supplemental to what your actual motivations for this position are. So keep that in mind. And then the tell us about a failure question, talk to us about a time you failed at something. It's just, it's a difficult question because you don't necessarily want to give them evidence of why you would be a bad employee. So when you provide that failure, one thing is avoid mentioning something that is like paramount to the position, something that is just absolutely necessary. Like if you're working in an events management program position and failure you discuss is how you failed at managing an event, you have to make sure that you provide evidence of how you've never let that happen again. And so you also have to make sure that the rationale for why that has never happened again makes sense. Like if it is that event management position and you say, and so we ended up scheduling 2 keynote speakers, went massively over budgets. And, in that part of the process, it was because there was breakdown of communication. And so, I just kind of, decided for any future events, I would just make sure I'm more aware of what other people are doing. That's not necessarily, good evidence of how you will prevent that from happening again. Rather, you could say something to the effect of, And so it became very obvious that because that breakdown of communication, that was going to be an absolutely necessary component. And so what I did was I put together a Teams group focused on that specific thing and focused on the specific keynote speaker. So what we did was, we created a document that said who the keynote speaker is, and we highlighted the individuals who had agreed and kind of like where they were at in the process to make sure that we were really making sure that everybody had access to this so that there weren't any cross wires. So we made a platform for communication for us to basically avoid that ever happening again. And that's something I continue using to this day. So make it so that the failure, why is that never going to happen again? Okay, and then situations examples. Typically, every interview is going to have mostly a focus on qualifications, but the way they identify those qualifications are going to be through behavioral interview questions. And so a behavioral interview question is asking you to relay an experience, a responsibility, a position, or specifically how you've used a skill in the past that explains how you could use it again in the future. And so a good way to kind of categorize your response is the STAR method. In the STAR method stands for situation, task, action, result. So situation, what's the setup of the story? Like, what is the overall, in this case, situation that you had to go through? Task, like what essentially needs to be accomplished. So what do you need to do to be able to kind of make sure that this task gets completed? And then action, what did you do? Like, no need to go much further context for that. And then results. And I know I put everybody forgets this part, not everybody forgets this part, but it is an easy thing to forget about. So make sure that you provide a conclusion to the story. Make sure you end your story. So whether that be mentioning kind of like what the result was, obviously, or if you have some kind of quantitative function in there, my efforts with designing this workforce development program made employee satisfaction jump up to 50% higher than it had been before. So it ended up at 75%, which, is substantial. That kind of stuff showcases that they are quantifiable things that you can do for this organization you're applying to. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. So a good way to categorize your and first we'll provide a little bit of an example. So in this example, tell me about a time where you showed good leadership. What were the necessary skills? So this is an experience that I literally had. So when I was working for this organization, the Washington Center, I was in charge of helping students find their positions and then helping them get to the overall site. One of my students was an applicant to the U.S. Marshals, but the little asterisk here was that they were not yet an American citizen, but they were going through their process. And so ended up kind of sussing out the situation and figuring out that they were going to have their citizenship by the day the program started. And so essentially, I had to figure out how to manage this student who was not yet an American citizen while simultaneously receiving their citizenship, how they were going to be able to start at the U.S. Marshals. And so I had to navigate this process and coordinate the hiring of this student. So what I ended up doing was I said, is there any kind of proof, any evidence, or any kind of specific document you received for becoming an American citizen? He was like, well, yeah, I get a certificate essentially. And so I was like, okay, cool. So what I need you to do is once you have that certificate, I need you to give that to me so we can send that off to the U.S. Marshals so that they are 100% aware that you are a U.S. citizen. And so what we're going to have to do is that basically as soon as you receive that, which was the day he was arriving, you need to give that to me so I can then send that off to my team to be able to kind of process this paperwork. So track the student down when they arrived, made sure I got that document, make sure we faxed it over to those individuals. And then, they were able to start their internship at the U.S. Marshals, albeit it was like a day or two late because they had to process this background check and they, expedited that process for the student. But I was able to make that student's, dream of working for a national security organization, a reality. And so that ended up being kind of one of the best times where I really kind of had to show good leadership. And so part of it was my initiative. A lot of it was kind of utilizing skills of communication and organization to make sure that we had the right materials and we had them, everything basically kind of put together so that it could be as fluid a process as possible, regardless of how complicated. So in this story, the situation is I had to work with a student who wanted to work for the U.S. Marshals and was also simultaneously receiving citizenship. Task was I had to navigate that hiring process, figure out what materials were necessary, and basically figure out how to get those to the U.S. Marshals. The action I took was I tracked the student down. I made sure that they had the proper paperwork and then kind of went through the process of communicating that to the team to make sure that they could send it off to the proper, the proper channels. And the result was that the students started their internship. They had an excellent experience. And down the road, they actually ended up going to grad school and started working for the CIA. So it was a really excellent opportunity, a really good, excellent example of specifically my leadership having an actual result and showcasing specifically how my leadership led to the success of another student. And then the result, student was able to start their internship. So the STAR method in general is an excellent way to categorize a response. It's not necessarily the end all be all of every answer has to fit into this equation. But if somebody has, say, trouble putting together a story, or if they aren't necessarily sure how to convey a specific experience, what I would suggest is using the STAR method. And for those who are kind of like not exactly sure, aren't really sure exactly how their story will fit into this model, what I would recommend is using the STAR grid. So the STAR grid is essentially this. It's a table that has the specific STAR method listed on there. So based on the themes, based on the skills that you know that they're going to want to know, or so they're going to ask you about in this interview, what I would do is put together a STAR grid with the leftmost column being focused on skill. In this case, initiative and dedication. The situation being that student was becoming a citizen on the day they wanted to start the U.S. Marshals, the task, action, results. And so this will help in terms of organizing the story so that you can eventually kind of get to the point where, talking about the situation, talking about this task, the action, and the result becomes far more natural. These are notes that you can bring with you to the interview process. What I would recommend, though, is that the results section is way too long. You don't necessarily want to be reading from something during an interview because then you're not engaging with the interviewer, you're engaging with the document that you wrote. So my suggestion would be, can you think of a way to basically break that down into a 2 to 3 word statement? And then same thing with action, task, and situation. Just make sure that you're able to kind of put that as briefly as you can, as more of just kind of like a reminder of what that aspect of this answer was. But this is a STAR grid. My recommendation is it's a very simple thing to put together and, recommend that you consider using it. So following the interview, you want to make sure you send a thank you email. If you were able to write and deliver, all the better. But considering the speed at which most interviews happen these days, it is unlikely you're going to be able to put this together that quickly. So my suggestion is basically send an email. The thank you email, super easy thing to do. And so typically what you can do is put together the same kind of stock like intro and then conclusion. And then the mid paragraph, I typically will put kind of a fact from the interview. So it'll be kind of like, thank you so much for taking the time to interview me. I really appreciated all your insights regarding this position at this organization. And the middle paragraph is, I really appreciated your mentioning this specific aspect of the position. It really kind of identifies with my goals and, what I want to make a reality of my profession. And then the closing paragraph, once again, thank you so much for taking the time and energy. If you need to reach me, you can do so by these contact information. You can also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you once again and have an excellent day. And so typically that's how I will construct my thank you emails. Evaluate the organization holistically, discuss within yourself the goals, beliefs, and values that the organization has. Do those mesh well with what your goals, beliefs, and values are? Does it provide you an opportunity to really kind of say advance within your career? And, consider some of the different other experiences within that experiences that you would be able to gain through that opportunity that will help move you again towards your ultimate career goals. Take stock in how you feel about the interview. Everybody will ask you, how did you do? I like to reframe that as, well, I don't know how I did because I won't have the results for at least a couple of days or if not a couple of weeks. What I can say though is that I added all the answers, the context I wanted to. I provided the experiences I was hoping I would. I hope I get it. This will help keep you from getting into that modality of, oh, well, I think that went terribly, or I think that went really well, and then kind of like boosting or lowering your expectations. Because that's only going to be more detrimental to your own psychology than it is specifically to your getting the position. So reframe it to think about, what did you provide? Were the answers kind of what you were hoping to? And did you at least conduct yourself in the way that you were hoping you would? And then reward yourself. Interviews are stressful experiences. They aren't necessarily meant to be kind of like the super lackadaisical kind of just joyride. So, consider, what is your reward scenario? Is it like a candy bar? Is it going to see the new movie? Is it going to go and, going for a hike? Whatever you specifically value in terms of rewards for yourself, this is a good way to kind of go about that. So reward yourself. Every step of this process should be considered a successful step. If you get an interview request, it's because your application was written well. If you pass the qualification interview, you are 100% qualified for the position. They don't put forward people who aren't qualified. If you make it through the first round of interviews, that means you're providing good, detailed answers. Your behaviors, your experience, your background, that is indicative that you are a good interviewer. And if you end up not getting a position after the first round of interviews, it might just mean that there was somebody else who was a better fit, not necessarily that you're a bad candidate. So consider all the different ways in which these are steps of success in this overall process. So some final reminders. This is a two-way street. Remember, you are evaluating the organization as well. Preparation and research are the key to a successful interview. If you don't necessarily know exactly what they might be asking you, that's not a bad thing, but you want to have an idea of kind of like the specific themes or skills that they're going to value in this interview process. Practically every interview allows you to ask at minimum 2 questions. Be sure you do ask them. People hate it in interviews when you say, no, I have no questions. It, one, shows disinterest in the opportunity, and two, it shows that you're not engaged in the overall interview. So make sure that you're using that opportunity to ask your questions to help you evaluate whether or not you want this opportunity. If you need a moment before answering a question, take it. Just don't take too long. 10 seconds is an eternity if there is silence in the room. So typically what I will do is say, oh, thank you so much for the question. I'm just going to consider some of my experiences. Okay, thank you. And then go into your answer. STAR method, situation, task, action, results, and then, provide your specific, results. Make sure you don't forget the ending. And if it's a double-barreled question, make sure you are answering both parts of the question. You can have a notepad and pen, or you can have your, I wouldn't use kind of an iPad or anything like that, just because for the most part, you again don't want any kind of notifications or anything coming up and distracting you, much less the interviewer. So a pad of paper and a pencil are going to be your best friend. You can make sure you can jot down kind of what the question is as they're kind of being asked. That way you're not leaving anything out. You can also feel free to ask, did that answer your question? Generally speaking, they might not want to disrupt the interview, and so they might just say, yeah, absolutely. And then they'll just continue on. So making sure that you're writing that information down as you're being asked those questions, that'll help make sure that you're able to answer or at least add whatever context you need to both parts of that question. And then reward yourself. In general, about 10% of applications turn into interviews. And so it's a rare process, but I mean, this is also indicative of success. If you get to that round, that is a successful application. So reward yourself for that. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciated being able to provide this information on interviewing skills. Again, my name is Brian Barr. I'm the Associate Director of Career Development with the Schar School of Policy and Government. If you have any questions or would like to kind of do a mock interview, you can feel free to contact me at the email address listed on the screen. I hope you'll have a fantastic rest of the day, and we'll see you around.